The rain had come in sheets that night, loud against the windows of St. Brigid's Community Hospital, where the scent of antiseptic never quite masked the faint trace of worry that clung to the air. Hallway lights flickered in their usual tired rhythm, casting elongated shadows that moved like tired ghosts over the linoleum. Past midnight, only the on-call staff remained, voices hushed, footsteps soft. Clara Walsh had drawn the short straw again. She didn't mind the night shifts, not really. There was a stillness to them that suited her temperament. While the world outside slept, she felt a certain clarity. Fewer distractions, fewer visitors, fewer emergencies, or so she'd thought. She was charting the vitals of a post-op patient when the call came in. A man mid-30s arrived alone through the ER doors, gashed along the side of his arm, a jagged wound partially concealed under the rolled sleeve of a drenched cashmere coat. No ID, no backstory. He'd driven himself to the hospital and walked in like someone half-dazed, refusing help from the receptionist until Clara herself came forward. He looked distant, the kind of distant that suggested grief rather than pain. "I'm fine," he'd said, voice low, rough around the edges. "You're bleeding," Clara replied, already slipping gloves on. "I can take care of it at home." Clara didn't move, her eyes, soft and steady, stayed on his. "I believe you can," she said, "but you don't have to." Something in her tone, calm, unbothered kind, made him pause. He sat. The wound was deep enough to require 8 stitches, maybe 9. Clara guided him into a small treatment room, the one with warm lighting and an old radio tucked in the corner. Sometimes she played classical music on low to soothe jittery children. Tonight she left it off. He smelled faintly of cedar and rain. His knuckles were scraped, dirt beneath his fingernails, not the sort of man you'd expect in a coat like that. "What happened?" she asked, cleaning around the wound. His jaw worked once before he answered. "Glass. Accident." He nodded but didn't elaborate. His eyes stayed on the wall behind her, focused on nothing. She didn't press further. People gave details when they were ready. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, every motion a silent promise. "You're safe now. You're being cared for." He watched her eventually, quietly, like he was observing something fragile he couldn't quite name. Her features were plain in the way certain faces became beautiful only over time, the kindness that carved itself into the corners of her mouth, the slight furrow that came when she concentrated, the way she didn't fill silences with noise. "Clara," he read from her badge, voice gentler now, "is it always this quiet at night?" "Sometimes," she smiled, "not always. Why are you hoping for a distraction?" "I'm not hoping for anything." She paused, needle midair. Something about the way he said it, not bitter, just honest, made her heart knock lightly against her ribs. Not hoping for anything. Like hope was a thing too far removed to wish for. She resumed the stitching. "Well, tonight you've got me." His lips lifted then, only a little, like he hadn't smiled in a very long time and wasn't sure if he remembered how. When she finished, she gave him aftercare instructions and a bottle of water, pressing both gently into his hands. "You should have someone look at the wound in a few days. Infection's not romantic." "I'll come back." "You don't have to," she said. "I want to." She met his eyes for the first time, really looked. They were gray, not icy, not cold, just muted, like the light had gone out of them a while ago and he hadn't noticed. "Okay," she said quietly, "I'll be here." He left without giving a name. The next morning she filed him under John Doe, marking the chart with a small note. Well-dressed, emotionally withdrawn, wound likely self-treated before arrival. May be grieving. In her heart, Clara knew he'd come back, not because he had to, but because something had shifted in the quiet space between them, something soft and unfinished. And in the back of his black SUV, parked beneath a streetlight 2 blocks away, Nathaniel Reed gripped the steering wheel and stared out into the rain. The hospital behind him pulsed dimly in the mirror. He ran a hand over his face, the stitched arm aching. He hadn't planned on surviving tonight, but then she'd touched him like he was worth keeping alive. And for the first time in months, he wasn't so sure he wanted to disappear. Nathaniel didn't return for 3 days. Clara kept telling herself she hadn't noticed, but every time the hospital doors slid open late at night, she looked up. Every time she walked past the room where she'd stitched him, her eyes lingered on the empty chair. She told herself 100 stories. Maybe he was passing through town. Maybe he'd gone back to the city. Maybe he'd forgotten her name the second he stepped outside. But people didn't forget that kind of sadness, and people didn't forget being seen in the middle of it. On the 4th night, just after midnight, she was restocking gauze in supply room B when she heard the door creak open. No voice, no footsteps, just the soft sound of rain again, faint on the windows and then his reflection in the glass. He hadn't knocked, he just stood in the doorway, one hand still wrapped loosely in the sleeve of his coat. His eyes looked heavier now, like sleep had been a stranger. He held a to-go cup in one hand. "I brought coffee," he said, like it was something rare. Clara turned slowly. Her pulse did a small, startled thing inside her chest. He looked not better, but more real. The coat was gone, replaced by a dark sweater that clung to his shoulders like it had been worn too many days in a row. There were tiny flecks of paint on the sleeve. "You didn't have to," she said, stepping closer, "but thank you." I didn't know how else to say I remembered. She took the cup from him gently. It was warm, cinnamon faintly. "You remembered my name." He nodded. "Clara, it suits you." He said it like it was something he'd repeated to himself, like her name had kept him company. "I wasn't sure you'd come back." I wasn't sure either. There was no one else in the hallway, no overhead voice calling for a doctor, just the faint ticking of the wall clock and the hum of fluorescent lights. She gestured toward the empty patient room, the same one as before. He followed without speaking. She pulled the curtain closed behind them. In the quiet, he rolled up his sleeve. The wound looked clean, healing well. She cleaned the area again anyway, checking her notes from before. "You've taken care of it. I've had practice." His voice carried something beneath it, something brittle, like whatever had trained him to tend his own wounds wasn't medical school but grief. "I never asked your name," she said gently. He hesitated. "Nathaniel." He didn't offer a last name, she didn't ask. He watched her work with the same quiet intensity, but his gaze felt different now. Less guarded, like he decided to stop hiding behind the silence. She noticed the way his jaw clenched when she pressed near the deeper suture, the way his hands fidgeted slightly when she wasn't looking directly at him. "Painting?" she asked, nodding toward the flecks on his sleeve. He looked down like he hadn't noticed. "I tried to throw a canvas out the window." She raised a brow. "Didn't work, glass shattered instead." "Odd." Clara didn't laugh, though she could have. She didn't scold or tease. She just placed a fresh bandage over the stitches and said, "You could have hurt yourself worse." "I didn't care. You do now." His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and searching. She held the gaze. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but you looked at me like I should." He didn't know what made him say it. He hadn't meant to, but she didn't flinch, didn't look away, just nodded. "That's what we do here," she said. "Try to make people remember they matter." He let out a breath through his nose, almost a laugh, not cynical, more like it hurt to let something soft escape. "How do you do that without knowing anything about them?" "I know enough. You came back." There was something else in her expression, gentle curiosity, not invasive, not demanding. Just a quiet invitation to speak if he wanted to. "Do you ever lose someone," he asked, voice low, "and then feel like the world is still running on schedule and you're the only one standing still?" Clara paused, her fingers brushing lightly over his wrist as she adjusted the bandage. "Yes," she said, "my mom died when I was 20. Everyone kept telling me what to do next, take time off school, make arrangements, see a counselor, but no one knew how to sit in the quiet with me. I wanted someone to just be there, not fix anything, just stay." Nathaniel looked at her like he hadn't expected her to understand, like part of him had assumed no one could. "What was her name?" "Margaret." "Did she like cinnamon coffee?" "She hated coffee, loved lemon tea, and baking pies badly." The corner of his mouth tugged upward again. It didn't reach his eyes, but it tried. They sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't awkward, it was something else, something that filled the space with warmth. "I lost my wife," he said finally. Clara's hands stilled, she didn't look away. Her breath caught a little, but she kept her voice level. "I'm so sorry." He nodded. She had cancer, it was fast. 2 months from diagnosis too. He didn't finish. Clara didn't knight him too. She was younger than me, she still believed in good things. Sunrises, paper books, love songs. Her heart squeezed. What was her name? Eva. A beat passed. "I keep trying to find pieces of her," he said, quieter now, "but every room I walk into just feels empty." Clara moved then, not dramatically, not in any way that would startle him. She just sat a little closer and placed her hand on his, not to comfort, not to fix, just to stay. Nathaniel didn't pull away. And in the still room, with the hum of distant monitors and the taste of cinnamon lingering between them, something shifted again. He hadn't planned on speaking, but she listened. She hadn't planned on feeling anything, but she felt him. The next morning when he left his name on the chart. Nathaniel Reid. Clara didn't recognize it, not right away. But miles away, across the glowing skyline of a city she didn't belong to, his name was etched on hospital wings, museum plaques, and high-rise towers. His face had once been printed in magazines beside phrases like visionary investor and billionaire philanthropist. But none of that mattered in room 3B. In that room, he was just a man learning how to breathe again. And Clara, she was the only one who'd seen him do it. Winter deepened its hold on the town, weaving frost along the hospital windows and muting the world in quiet shades of gray. Snow arrived softly like an apology, layering the streets in stillness. At St. Brigid's, the nights grew colder, but inside, things had started to shift. Nathaniel came back again, then again. He never gave a reason, and Clara never asked for one. Sometimes he'd sit in the waiting area, untouched cup of coffee in his hands, long before she clocked in. Sometimes he brought books he never opened. Other nights he'd vanish mid-conversation, as if the air had changed and it was suddenly too hard to stay. But always, eventually, he returned. They spoke of ordinary things: her neighbor's cat who had a habit of sneaking into the ER lobby, a little boy in pediatrics who insisted his broken wrist was the result of a superhero mission gone wrong, the merits of snow versus rain. Nathaniel listened with the kind of attention most people forgot how to give, and when he spoke it was never small talk, it was precise, earnest, like every word cost him something and was therefore worth more. Clara told herself this was fine, that she was just being kind, that it was part of her job, even off the clock, to offer care where it was needed. But she found herself lingering near the staff entrance when her shift ended, hoping to catch him on his way out. She started bringing an extra thermos just in case. Her heart noticed things she tried to ignore. How his voice softened when he said her name, how he sometimes looked at her hands like they were the only steady thing in a world still shifting beneath his feet. One night during the week between Christmas and New Year's, the hospital was unusually quiet. Flu season had eased its grip, and the storm outside had kept most people indoors. Clara found herself folding blankets in the staff lounge, her shift winding down to silence, when Nathaniel appeared in the doorway holding a small, battered paperback. He didn't speak at first, just held the book out. "What's this?" she asked, taking it carefully. "I thought maybe you'd like it. Eva used to read it every winter." Clara turned the cover in her hands, the snow child, her breath caught. "I've read this," she said, "years ago." "I never have," he admitted. "I couldn't, not while she was alive, not after." "Why now?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Because you might read it again, and maybe you'd tell me how it ends." She didn't know what to say to that, not right away. So she nodded and held the book like something precious. "Are you hungry?" she asked after a moment. He looked surprised. "There's some soup in the staff kitchen," she added. "Nothing fancy, but it's warm." Nathaniel followed her. They sat at the tiny table tucked beside the refrigerator, paper bowls between them, steam curling up between sips. He was quieter than usual, not distant, just searching. "Do you ever wonder what people see when they look at you?" he asked. Clara looked up. "Sometimes." "What do you think they say?" "A nurse, someone who listens, who remembers their tea order, who doesn't mind silence." He nodded. "All of that's true." She offered a small smile. "What about you?" Nathaniel stared into his soup. "I used to think people saw success, control, power maybe. And now I think they just see the outline of a man who once had something worth losing." Her chest tightened. She reached for his hand without thinking. He didn't pull away. "You're not an outline, Nathaniel." He blinked slowly, the words catching somewhere in his chest. "You talk like you've done all the grieving," Clara said gently, "but sometimes I think you're still in the middle of it, that maybe you're just starting." "I don't know how." "Start small, say her name out loud, eat when you don't want to, let someone sit with you when the nights get long." He looked at her, then really looked, and there was something new in his gaze, not just gratitude, not just trust, something almost like want. But Clara stood before it could settle. "I should get back, we've got a new admit upstairs." He nodded, but he stayed seated as she left the room, hand resting over the book she'd left behind. That night as she walked to her car in the snow, she found him waiting. No coat, no pretense, just standing beside her dented little Corolla, snowflakes caught in his dark hair. "Clara," he said as she approached. Her breath curled in the cold. "I don't want to keep pretending this is just a coincidence." She held his gaze. "I never thought it was." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Then let me take you somewhere, not far, just out of this place." She smiled, lips parting in surprise. "You want to take your nurse out to dinner?" "I want to take you, Clara, not because you patched me up, not because you were kind, but because when I'm near you, I remember how it feels to be alive." She let the words settle in the air, heavy and bright all at once. "Okay," she said after a beat, "but I'm driving, I don't trust you with glass." He laughed then, full and warm and human. And for the first time, it didn't sound like it hurt. They didn't go far. Just a small and outside town, tucked into the edge of the woods where snow dusted the eaves and lanterns glowed amber through frosted windows. It wasn't glamorous, but there was a fireplace, a shelf of well-thumbed novels, and a corner table that overlooked the lake, frozen over in a quiet kind of stillness. Nathaniel didn't speak much on the drive. He kept glancing at her hands on the wheel, the way she tapped her thumb in time with the music. A habit maybe, or nerves, either way it calmed him. Clara hadn't dressed up and he hadn't expected her to. She wore a thick gray sweater and her hair was down for once, curled slightly at the ends like she'd brushed it out without fuss. He wanted to reach across the table just to touch the back of her hand, but he didn't, not yet. They ordered soup again, lentil and sage, and warm bread with butter that melted before it touched the plate. She smiled at the small coincidence. He filed it away like something sacred. Clara watched him differently that evening, not like a patient, not like someone to be fixed, but like a man she was learning in quiet increments, each new detail surprising her into care. "I still don't know what you do," she said lightly, halfway through her second cup of tea. He looked down at the rim of his glass. "I'm not sure I do either." She waited and he sighed. "Investment firm, real estate, tech, mostly international. I used to spend more time in the air than on the ground." "That explains the watch." He glanced down at it, then slipped it off and set it on the table. "I haven't looked at it once tonight." The truth of it startled her. She didn't know what to say. So she reached for her tea again and he let her have the quiet. A few minutes later, she leaned back and looked at him with eyes full of soft mischief. "You're kind of a big deal, aren't you?" He groaned. "That depends who you ask." "I did Google you." "You did. Didn't want to ruin the mystery." His smile faded into something more serious. Would it ruin it? She tilted her head. "Do you want the truth?" He nodded. "I think I'd still be sitting across from the man who told me about Eva, the one who brought me a dog-eared novel and asked about my favorite pie." He stared at her like he was memorizing the shape of those words. "I've been rich for a long time, Clara, but no one ever looked at me like that meant less than how I mourn." She reached out then, fingers brushing his. "I'm not interested in your money, Nathaniel." "I know," he said, "that's why I'm here." They didn't kiss, not that night. But when they stood to leave, she let him hold her coat open for her, and when he walked her to the car, their hands found each other in the dark, snow settling on their shoulders, soft as breath. The following week blurred, shifts, brief visits, a text now and then. He started reading The Snow Child, leaving her voice messages about it. Sometimes she replied with her own little observations, memories, even a short poem she'd found tucked in a patient's donated book. They never talked about what was happening between them. They didn't need to. Then one evening near closing, he didn't show. Clara waited, her stomach twisting in a way she couldn't explain. At first she told herself he was busy, maybe a flight, maybe sleep, but hours passed, then days. She left a message, just one, then nothing. A week later, she found him in the ER waiting area. It was just past midnight. Snow had melted into a cold drizzle, and the hospital smelled faintly of wet wool and floor cleaner. He looked wrecked. Dark shadows under his eyes, jaw tight, hands clenched. She crossed the lobby in 4 quick steps. "What happened?" He didn't answer right away, just held up a folded piece of paper, water-streaked and shaking. Clara took it, unfolded it. It was a letter from Eva. He'd found it behind a bookshelf, sealed and forgotten, written just before her final hospital stay, ink smudged in places. The first lines hit like breath against glass. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone and I'm sorry. I wanted more time. But if there's one thing I want you to do now, it's this: live. Don't make your grief your home. I know you'll want to, but promise me, when someone reaches for you, don't pull away." Clara read it twice, then again. When she looked up, Nathaniel's eyes were full. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew I'd stop trying." Clara folded the letter back and handed it to him carefully, like it was a part of her own story now. "You didn't stop," she said. "You came here. I came to you." Her breath caught. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the tremble in his chest. "Eva was my whole world. I don't want to erase her. But I think I'm allowed to miss her and still find something beautiful in this." "In me?" she asked, voice small. "In you," he said. Then finally, he reached for her cheek, fingers brushing snow-damp strands of hair away. And when he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or heated. It was slow, careful, the kind of kiss that asked permission at every turn, the kind of kiss that answered every silence between them. When they parted, she leaned her forehead to his. "I'm not here to save you," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but you make me want to be someone worth saving." By the time spring reached the town, the snow had long since melted, leaving behind earth that smelled of thawed roots and new beginnings. The trees around St. Brigid's Hospital stood bare but expectant, like they too were waiting for something to bloom. Clara had started taking her breaks outdoors when the sun permitted, sitting on the low stone wall near the parking lot with a cup of coffee warming her hands. Her shifts were still long, her patients still numerous, but there was a new rhythm to her days, not softer exactly but fuller. Nathaniel didn't vanish anymore. He came by with books, yes, but also with stories, half-finished ones from his travels, small details from board meetings he used to dread but now watched with clearer eyes. Sometimes he helped her carry supplies up to the children's ward. Sometimes he just walked beside her quietly, matching her pace without a word. He'd moved into a small home at the edge of town. No staff, no drivers, just Nathaniel and the pine trees and a dog he'd adopted impulsively, an old retriever named Finch who snored like a freight train and followed him like a shadow. Clara met Finch 2 weeks after Nathaniel's letter night. She'd gone to check on him after a longer shift, half worried the grief had crept back in and curled around him again. Instead, she found the two of them in the backyard, Nathaniel sitting in a lawn chair, book in one hand, coffee in the other, dog sprawled at his feet. "I read the letter again," he said, looking up. She nodded, settling next to him. "Eva had a way of seeing forward," he said, "even when I refused to. She gave you permission. She reminded me I didn't need it." They sat for a while, Finch's tail thumping now and then, the breeze tugging at Clara's hair. Nathaniel glanced sideways at her, something unspoken gathering in his throat. "I thought I'd live the rest of my life with a heart only half awake," he said, "but somehow, without asking, you brought me back." "I didn't do anything special," she said softly. "You didn't try to fix me," he said, "you just stayed." That spring, they began building something quietly. It didn't look like fairy tales or movies. It looked like dinners at her apartment with too much garlic in the pasta. Mornings when they passed each other in the hospital halls and didn't need to say anything, just a glance, a touch at the elbow. It looked like her laughing when Finch stole her shoe and Nathaniel trying not to cry during a school play at the pediatric ward. He hadn't made any declarations and she hadn't needed them. But one evening in May, just as the sky turned that specific shade of lavender that only happened before summer, he stood in her kitchen drying dishes and said, "I'd like you to come with me next time I visit the house." "The city one?" she asked, surprised. He nodded. "It's been closed since Eva, but I think I'm ready." She set down the spoon in her hand. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to erase her. I want to remember her in rooms that don't hurt anymore, and I want you there." Clara stepped close, placed her hand on his chest. "You don't have to go back to the person you were," she said. "I don't want to," he replied. "I want to be someone better for her, for you, for myself." She didn't say anything. She just rested her head against him, listening to the steady rhythm of a heart that was no longer broken but rebuilding. They drove to the city the following weekend. The house was as grand as she'd feared, tall windows, wide hallways, the scent of dust and memory clinging to the walls, but it wasn't cold, not anymore. He took her room by room, introduced her to the piano Eva used to play, showed her the sunroom Eva had filled with plants that never lived long but always tried. Then he led her to a smaller room at the back of the house. "I think this was always meant to be a studio," he said, opening the door. Clara stepped in, the light was soft, golden, a half-finished canvas leaned against the wall. I want to fill it, he said, with new things, paintings, photos, maybe a letter from someone I lost and another from someone I found. She turned toward him. Nathaniel, she said quietly, what is this? It's yours, he said. If you want it, if you want me, I'm not asking you to fix my grief. I'm asking if you'll keep walking beside me while I learn to carry it. Clara didn't speak for a long time, she didn't have to. She just stepped forward, placed her hand in his, and nodded. That night, as the city lights blinked on beyond the windows, Clara sat beside him on the floor of the studio, their shoulders touching, silence thick but warm. And Nathaniel, once a man who had built an empire out of steel and silence, leaned his head against hers and whispered, "You were the thread that stitched me back together." She turned to him, eyes steady, voice full. "And you let yourself heal." It wasn't the kind of love that asked for grand gestures. It was the kind that held grief in one hand and hope in the other. The kind that grew not from forgetting the past, but from making room for it beside the future. And as spring settled in fully, letting green return to the trees and sunlight to the windows, they remained side by side. A nurse who stayed. A man who chose to stay, too. Together in the quiet, becoming whole.